Being a parent is probably the toughest job there is, and of all things we are not trained for it. Thomas Gordon wanted to change that with his parent effectiveness training. And what is taught there is also described in the book of the same name. And today we're going to have a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung, and in today's book review I'd like to present a book about raising children, parent effectiveness training by Thomas Gordon. Gordon was a US-American psychologist and a disciple of Carl Rogers, same as Marshal Rosenberg, whose Nonviolent Communication we discussed before. So there are some similarities in their approaches. You will probably notice some if you watched the video on Nonviolent Communication. And this is also one reason why I find this book very interesting and do a review about it, because it is similar to Rosenberg's work. The parent effectiveness training originally was really a training, a seminar parents visited to learn about parenting, and it is still available today in a lot of countries. We will provide a link in the video description to the corresponding website. There are plenty of spin-offs. There is, for example, also a teacher effectiveness training, a leader effectiveness training, and more. Gordon method is used as a general term to describe all of those. The book was published in 1970 and it has been quite successful. According to the cover, it has been sold 4 million times worldwide. The book contains 16 individual chapters. Of course, it would be too exhaustive to discuss all of them in detail, so I will summarize the most important topics. The first chapters are a kind of introduction where the basic situation, the basic problem is explained. Gordon says parents are blamed, for example, if children turn out badly, behave badly, but they are not trained. And this is what he intended to do with his parent effectiveness training. The P.E.T. uses a different approach than classical methods. The two approaches you probably all know are, on one hand, the approach where you are very authoritarian, very strict, where you place a lot of emphasis on discipline and you use rewards and punishment to get children to behave as you want. And the other approach you probably know is the non-authoritarian approach, where you don't set any boundaries, you never criticize or punish children, you just let them do as they please. And both of those don't really work very well. Most parents are aware of that, Gordon says, but they don't really know any alternatives. And this he wanted to provide with the P.E.T. The P.E.T. aims at building a loving, respectful relationship, and it intends to teach children to be independent, to act on their own. For this to work, parents need to change their attitude in some ways. Acceptance, for example, is a key issue here that we will encounter again in a moment. And this seems to work very well. Gordon explains, for example, that in the past, when they started the program, he and his colleagues were convinced that this typical rebellion that occurs when kids reach a teenager age that this is something that is natural and necessary and that will always occur. But when they started doing the P.E.T, they noticed that if parents successfully implement the P.E.T method, then this rebellion in the teenager age often doesn't occur at all. Of course, in these first introductory chapters, the groundwork for the rest of the book is laid, the structure of the book is explained, and a very important concept is introduced, and that is problem ownership. Who actually owns the problem? Whose problem is it? Because depending on the answer, you need a different approach. And in the remainder of the book, the different situations and the different approaches are explained. First are situations where the child owns the problem. So the child has a problem that doesn't actually affect you. Maybe there is some trouble with the child's friends or problems at school, school sucks, something isn't going as the child wants, stuff like that. In such a situation, you are not affected and basically you don't need to solve that problem. It is the child's problem. And that alone is often a big change in thinking for parents, and it is also often a relief. Oh, so I don't have to deal with everything? I am not in charge of all problems? Thank God. But of course, we can and we should support the child in solving the problem. And here, acceptance comes into play. Acceptance is quite important. Gordon says acceptance of the child by the parent is a powerful force and a driver for change. And this might be unintuitive at first, because we might be bound to think, if I put pressure on the child, you will do as I tell you, or you will regret it, then this will cause the child to change. And if I just tell the child, oh, I accept you as you are, he doesn't have any reason to change, everything will stay as it is. But Gordon says the opposite is true. If I put pressure on the child, it will put up resistance, defiance, and the situation will not change at all. But if I accept the child, this will create room for growth and improvement and change. But acceptance isn't so easy. One important point Gordon clarifies very early is that it is not possible to accept the child but not their behavior. I can say, oh yeah, I accept the child, I love the child, but everything they do is so unnerving and unpleasant and I hate all of it. Now, this is not possible. The child and their behavior are intricately linked. The child is basically the sum of their behavior, and I have to accept both in the end. And I have to show my acceptance, otherwise it won't do any good. So how can I show my acceptance? Gordon provides a couple of ways, and the most important one, a very valuable tool he provides, is active listening. Let's take a typical situation. Dinner is about ready, but my daughter says snottily, I don't want to eat anything. So what is the usual reaction of parents? Maybe I provide a solution. Oh, just sit down first. Appetite will come if you see the food. Or maybe I will criticize. What kind of tone is that, young lady? Or maybe I will do some questioning. Oh, what's going on? Don't you feel well? Is there a problem? Is something amiss? And there are more typical approaches. Gordon calls those the 12 communication roadblocks because they won't lead to any success in the communication. They will block any a chance of success. So I should avoid them, and I should instead use active listening, which first of all really means to listen attentively. And I do not introduce I do not introduce any of my own positions. Thus, I avoid the 12 communication roadblocks. Instead, what I do is just to mirror my understanding of what the child tells me. And I don't just repeat it like a parrot, but I mirror my understanding of the child's feelings. So, for example, if the child says, "Oh, my math teacher is such an idiot," I won't respond, "Oh, you have a bad math teacher," but I would say, for example, "You are angry at your math teacher," because that's the important point of what the child is saying. So in the example with the daughter who doesn't want to eat, the parent said, "Oh, you don't feel like eating," and the daughter said, "Oh no, my stomach is like all strung up," and the dialogue continues, the conversation continues, and after a little while it becomes clear that the actual problem is that the daughter is afraid that her boyfriend will break up with her. And this is a phenomenon that occurs in a lot of examples, that due to active listening, it becomes clear that the actual problem is something else than what seemed to be the problem at first. There is an example I found quite interesting of a child who had problems falling asleep in the evening, and the mother, who was already quite distressed, decided, "Oh, I will do this active listening, I can do it," and she successfully managed to do it, and the conversation developed and touched different topics, and after a while it became clear that the child explained that he was afraid of suffocating during his sleep, because a friend had told him some stupid things, put some stupid ideas in his head. And after the mother calmed him and explained things to him and took care of his worries, he was able to sleep perfectly fine. And this I found interesting, because how is a parent supposed to figure that out? You don't have any chance unless the child actually tells you. And that is something you can achieve by using active listening. I think that is something that really makes active listening quite valuable. Now, of course, you might wonder, for example, with a daughter who doesn't want to eat, isn't it possible that the daughter will just finish the conversation? For example, by saying, "Yeah, I don't really want to eat, I will go to my room, see you later," or something like that. Yeah, of course, that will probably happen, especially at the beginning. But I'd say this isn't the worst possible outcome in this situation, because at least the daughter isn't angry at you, and you haven't given her additional worries in a situation where she already doesn't feel well, where she already is worrying about something else. And I think in a lot of cases, the desire, the need to talk about things is there. And if you continue to use active listening and build up the trust of the children, they will do it more and more. Now, of course, for that, it is important that you do it right. Therefore, Gordon discusses a couple of typical mistakes you might make. And probably the worst of them is to open the door and then slam it shut. So you use active listening and it works. Your child starts opening up and starts telling you things, starts telling you about their worries and whatnot. And then something comes up that you really don't like. For example, the child might say, "Yeah, and I'm considering dropping out of school." And so you might be inclined to put your fist down and say, "What? No way! I don't allow it. You won't do it. Are you crazy?" Something like that. And of course, this would kill any trust you've started to build up. So this is the most important thing you need to avoid. Another example you might make is that you try to manipulate through active listening, that you still add your own position. There is a funny example of a son who was distressed because he failed at some tests, some exams, and he was worried of getting into trouble, and the mother used active listening, tried to use active listening, but it went like, "Oh, so you are frustrated because you didn't study enough?" And yeah, of course, the child quickly noticed and it didn't work out well. Next are situations where the parent owns the problem and the child is not affected, so exactly the other way around. Imagine, for example, you have to do some important and complicated work and the child is troubling you. Let's say they are listening to music at high volume and that is quite distracting. So what would be the usual sensible approach? Opening the door and saying, "You will turn down that damn music right now." And the child will probably turn up the volume in defiance, so that didn't work out. Gordon says it doesn't have to be like that. He says children will often be considerate and will change their behavior if they notice that their behavior is a problem for other people, if they notice they are troubling other people. But the important thing is how we present the problem. And here Gordon explains the difference between you messages and I messages. You messages, you probably know, are like, "You listen to music too loud all the time. You don't show any consideration." So you messages are often judgmental and they often contain accusations. And this won't lead to any successful conversation. So what we should do instead is use I messages to explain how we feel about the situation. Now, this isn't just a trick. It doesn't work to just rephrase things. It doesn't make any difference if I say "you are an idiot" or "I think you are an idiot." So this doesn't work. We really have to change our approach to the situation. In the situation with the loud music, we might, for example, say, "The music is so loud that I hear it in my study even if the door is closed. And that is frustrating for me because I have to do some important and complicated work and the music disturbs me and distracts me." Now you might wonder, does it need to be so extensive? Maybe I don't talk to my child so much at all usually. Well, it makes sense to go into some detail. Gordon explains the components of a good iMessage, and I won't talk about all of them, but there is one I find important, and that is to describe the impact the behavior has on us. So, for example, let's say I tell my child, "When you didn't come home from school at the usual time and you didn't call, I was worried." There we might want to add, "And therefore I couldn't concentrate on my work," or "therefore I couldn't enjoy my spare time," or "therefore I didn't dare to go outside even so I had an important appointment." So really tell what impact the behavior has on you. And a funny thing is, Gordon mentions that parents often say, "Yeah, and when I did this and I thought about what the impact is, I noticed there isn't any, and I thought, oh well, so I could as well leave the child alone." So do those iMessages really work? Gordon clearly says yes, because remember, the situation is we have a problem, not the child. So if I go to the child and tell him, "Oh, you are bothering me, you are getting on my nerves," this doesn't really convey what the situation is, and it will just provoke resistance. However, if I take the child seriously and just tell him what the problem is and why I am distressed, and I take the child into responsibility, often the child will be responsible and will change their behavior. Now, of course, there are also plenty of mistakes and problems that might arise here, and Gordon describes them, but won't go into any detail here. iMessages won't always solve the problem. They will reach the limits in cases where both the parent and the child own the problem. In cases where there is a conflict of needs. Such situations are often understood by the parents as a struggle to win or to lose. And the basic approaches by parents are what Gordon just calls method 1. The parent wins at the expense of the child, so the parent just use their authority. It is done as I say, you will do whatever. Or method 2, child wins at the expense of the parents, where the parents just let the child get their way. Both don't work very well. Gordon says parents usually understand that, but they don't know any alternatives, so they kind of switch back and forth. Now, Gordon provides some background information here. He elaborates on issues related to authority. He asks, what is authority actually? Where does it come from? And there is an interesting detail here that concerns this rebellion in teenage years I mentioned before, because Gordon says an important source of parental authority is the dependence of the children. Children depend on their parents for a lot of their needs, such as food or allowance and the room they live and so on. And parents can use this dependency for rewards and punishment. However, this parental power will diminish over time when the children grow older, and this rebellion in the teenager years is often a result of the children finally being able to fight back against the parents' use of their authority, parents' use of this dependency. Gordon also discusses the negative effects the use of parental authority has on the children. There are a lot of different variations, different possibilities. I will just mention two that are especially important. Now, one that is quite obvious is rebellion, defiance. The children try to fight back against the parents. There is a funny example here of a mother who says, well, when we raised our daughter, there were 3 things we really cared about. We wanted her to be orderly, we wanted her to be a good Christian, and we wanted her to avoid alcohol. However, now when she's grown up, her apartment is in chaos all the time. She never sets foot in church, and she has wine every evening. Another typical result of parental authority is that the children withdraw and avoid their parents and try to escape and block out their parents out of their daily lives. And that is something that is mentioned in a lot of examples of cases where there are problems between parents and children, that parents say, I don't know anything about my child, they never talk to me, they don't tell me about anything, I don't know what's going on in their lives. So this seems to be a problem that occurs quite a lot. So, as I mentioned, parents often understand that using their authority isn't the best way, but they don't know alternatives. And the one Gordon provides, he just calls method 3. And method 3 is the no-lose method. It is actually quite simple. Those who have a problem with each other, the parent and the child, they sit down together and discuss possible solutions and find a common solution. And this is supposed not to be just a lazy compromise, but a solution that really works for both of them. And this isn't so special at all. It is the way we would solve a conflict with another grown-up, with an equal. And Gordon says this is what we do with children as well. Method 3 is a democratic approach, so it is grounded in important values that we want to teach to our children as well. And Gordon says it works quite well. First of all, the child is actually motivated to carry out the solution because it was part of coming up with that solution. So I don't need to watch and supervise and put pressure on the child all the time to make sure they actually carry out the solution. And since I treat the child like an adult, I help him become more independent, to think actively and speak for their own, and be more independent. And as with active listening, it is more likely that I will actually figure out what the core of the problem is instead of dealing with some superficial symptom problems. And of course, it creates an interaction between parent and child that is based more on love and respect and less on hostility and fighting to win. Nonetheless, parents have plenty of concerns about method 3, and Gordon discusses those. First of all, a lot of parents ask, but don't children want boundaries? This is something we hear frequently. Now Gordon clarifies, children want to know their boundaries. They want to know what they are allowed to do, what they are not allowed to do. They want to know what parents like, what parents dislike. But they don't want to have arbitrary boundaries set for them. Another interesting question parents ask is, won't I lose the respect of my children if I do that? Won't I appear weak to them if I allow them to participate in finding solutions and so on? And here Gordon asks, how do you gain the respect of other adults? Now obviously you have to earn it. And for children it works just the same way. You cannot just demand respect because you are in control, you are in charge, but you have to earn it. And parents who successfully employ method 3 often notice that they get an entirely new kind of respect from their children. Actual respect and not just fear of their authority. Gordon explains the individual steps you should follow when you use method 3. I don't want to go into detail here. I just want to mention two aspects I found important. First of all, everything is quite transparent. You tell your children up front, I've learned this new method to resolve conflicts in my parent effectiveness training course or by reading the book, and I want to use that. I would be happy if you took part in that. And also in the actual specific situation where you want to use it, you tell your child, I would like to do this method 3 conflict resolution. Will you take part in it? So it is all quite transparent. There is nothing like tricking the child in any way. And the actual process is quite simple. You basically do a brainstorming, so you clearly separate between collecting ideas and evaluating ideas. And then you figure out which of the ideas you collected will work for both sides. And then you define the actual steps you need to take to carry out the solution. And after you've implemented the solution, you check if it works out well or if you need to make changes. So you don't assume that everything will be perfect right from the beginning, but that you will need to maybe approach the best solution step by step by improving on things in increments. Now, method 3, as you notice, isn't that complicated, but for it to work well, you should already have learned to use active listening properly, and you should also have learned to use iMessages, because you need active listening to figure out what the child's position is, what the child's needs are, and you need iMessages to explain your own position and your own needs. Now, of course, there will be plenty of problems that might occur, especially in the beginning. Children where you used method 1 a lot, children where you used your authority a lot, will probably be skeptical. There will be some mistrust and resistance at the beginning, because they might suspect this is a new trick to get them to behave in a certain way. On the other hand, children where you used method 2 a lot, children you used to always get their way, they might not be happy with the idea that they also need to be considerate of others. And of course, especially in the beginning, agreements you made might be broken sometimes, but it's important to stick to it and build things up step by step. What you certainly should not do is fall back to method 1 if method 3 does not work out right away. So you say, oh well, if this doesn't work, you will all do as I say, and I say whatever. This would again destroy all trust that you have built up. So method 3 is quite useful, quite helpful, but it won't always work. There are some conflicts. Those conflicts that are most problematic, most serious, where Gordon says children might end up firing their parents. The relationship between parents and children might permanently suffer. Their method 3 won't work. Those are conflicts where there isn't a conflict of needs, but a conflict of values. Gordon calls those value collisions, because children have their own values, their own ideals, their own preferences, and those might differ from those of the parents. And there will be points of friction if it comes to things like hairstyle, clothing, tattoos, piercings, choice of friends, choice of partners, career choices, recreational activities, and whatnot. In all of those cases, what the children do does not actually affect the parents. It doesn't have any negative impact on the parents. It doesn't collide with their needs, but the parents might not like it. It might not be what the parents would prefer. By the way, Gordon clarifies that if there is actually a collision of needs, then children will often be willing to negotiate. He gives an example of a parent who is a principal of a school, and the son is going to that school, and he says to the son, yeah, your hairstyle is a problem for me, because I lose the respect and authority from the parents, of the teachers. And in this case, the son was willing to change his hairstyle because he understood there was an actual tangible problem, and it wasn't just because the father didn't like his hairstyle. However, in most cases, it is about values and preferences. And Gordon says it is one of the most common mistakes of parents that they try to modify behavior that they should just leave alone, that doesn't really conflict with their needs, that they really don't have any business interfering with. Because he says children rebel, when their freedom is threatened. Children have rights too, and they will fight for them, and that is perfectly all right, and that is something parents need to understand. Now, at this point, you might wonder, am I not allowed to teach my values? Isn't this one of the most important points of raising children, to teach my values to my children? And Gordon says, oh yes, you are perfectly allowed to do that, and you will inevitably do that. However, you won't do it by preaching to your children, but by being an example, by being a role model. Oh, now this is difficult. So if I tell my children, you must always tell the truth, you must not tell lies, and then my children observe me in my day-to-day lives, oh, thank you so much for your invitation. We were so happy about it. However, we have guests that evening. I'm sorry we can't come. Oh, boss, I'm so sorry. I'm so sick I can't come to work the entire week. Oh, child, we won't tell mother what the new laptop cost, will we? Huh? Then things certainly won't work out, I'm afraid. Now, what we are perfectly allowed to do is to act as a consultant for our children. Let's say I don't want my children to start smoking. Now, of course, I can share my knowledge and my experience with them. I can tell them, for example, about all the health hazards and problems that are related to smoking that I know about. And I might share my own experiences. Maybe I started smoking in childhood, and I later regretted it because it was so difficult to give it up. I can tell my children about all of that, and this is perfectly fine and helpful. What I can't do is force them to do as I prefer, because if I tell my children I won't allow smoking and it's prohibited and whatnot, yeah, they won't smoke at home, but they will smoke outside. I can't supervise them throughout the entire day, so I don't really have a chance to really enforce my will here. Now, Gordon says, a lot of difficult conflicts between parents and children can be avoided if parents are willing to change as well. And again, this might be unintuitive at first, because if we think about parenting, we think that the children are supposed to change, but not the parents. However, if we consider any other relationship, we are quite aware that all parties need to adjust and to change for things to work out in the long run. And Gordon says this is exactly the same for parents and children. And he brings up a couple of important questions. For example, do we actually accept ourselves? Because if I accept myself, it is way easier for me to accept others, for example, my children. And furthermore, if I have a solid sense of self, I don't need my children for personal validation. Another interesting question is, who owns the children? Because Gordon describes that in his contact with parents, in his conversations with parents, he often noticed that parents perceive children as their property. They say, they are my children. I can do with them as I please. And this is quite a problematic idea. Another interesting observation Gordon made is that when he spoke to parents, they often said, oh, we like children. We will love children. However, when he continued talking to them, it quickly became clear that they like only specific types of children. For example, children that share their interests and preferences, that have similar abilities. For example, there might be parents who love music and love playing instruments and whatnot, and they totally like children who are little musicians and who love music as well. But if a child has no interest in music, then liking children is over quite quickly. Now, all of this isn't very easy, so it begs the question, can parents actually change their attitude? Is it even possible? And Gordon says in the past, he and his colleagues would have clearly said, no, people don't change. If people change at all, they change after several months of intensive psychotherapy. However, in the parent effectiveness training, it turned out that parents are actually often willing and able to change their views, their behaviors, their attitudes, with a lot of positive effects on their family life. At the end of the book, there are some appendices I'd like to mention because they are very nice. There are some little exercises for the different methods Gordon presents in the book. And there's also a list of the 12 communication roadblocks with some explanations. Now, finally, let's proceed to the critique. Now, is this book a good guide on parenting? I'm afraid I can't really be the judge of that, because we don't have any children and we don't plan on having any. And this is the only guide on parenting I have ever read. So I can't really be the judge of that. However, I like the idea, the approach. Now, Carl Rogers and Marshal Rosenberg and Thomas Gordon, they invented a new approach to communication, to dealing with others. And Rosenberg based his nonviolent communication on that, which is also a great method. And Gordon said, hey, this approach to communication, I think this would be great for the interactions between parents and children. And I think this is quite a good idea. I like that. And I'd like to emphasize that Gordon's approach isn't strange or out of touch or unusual in any way. It reflects very well the change that has taken place in pedagogy. Because in pedagogy, in the past, people thought that teachers are supposed to be a bit like sculptors. Sculptor has a big block of marble in front of him and he uses his hammer and chisel to turn it into a nice statue. And in the same way, the teacher will turn the child into a great useful adult. And you might notice what the problem is with this image, with this picture. In this image of the sculptor, the child is nothing but useless, worthless, raw material that you use to create the good adult. But the child itself is pretty much worthless. And in the past, there were quite unpleasant ideas, such as that you need to break the will of the child for parenting to really succeed. So quite unpleasant. And nowadays, the image is that the teacher is more like a gardener who will take care of the little plants and nurture them and protect them so they can really grow and flourish. And of course, ideas like acceptance are quite important there too. And the idea that you want the children to be independent and want to help them to become independent is also quite important, and that you sometimes need to take a step back and just let things develop. All of this is there as well, so it really is quite similar after all. Now I have to admit, this is not a very simple book, not a very simple method. Now, the book is quite well written, it is easy to comprehend, it is fun to read, that's not the problem. However, what you are taught is not a collection of simple tricks, but that you need to change your attitude. Now, in my opinion, this is the only way that really has a chance to work, but of course it is quite difficult. And I guess throughout the book there are a lot of things that are difficult and maybe a bit unpleasant for parents. A lot of deep-seated beliefs are challenged. In a lot of ways, the power of the parent is diminished. You are not allowed anymore to enforce your will, but you have to accept the child and whatnot. So this might really be difficult to change your attitude as is expected here. But I think it really is worth the effort. I think there is a lot of potential for a change for the better, for real benefit here. I believe raising children is probably one of the biggest undertakings, one of the biggest projects you can have in your life. And I guess every person who goes through this giant project will come out changed, will come out a different person. And I think what Gordon teaches here will really help finish this project in a positive way, and also make it a way of personal growth, personal development. So the bottom line is, I really like the book. I like this idea of treating children as equals, of treating children like adults. And this is also a reason why I did a review of this book, even though a parenting guide doesn't exactly match our usual scope of topics. This edition I have here is pretty nice. I don't very much like these stock photos of happy families, but well, who cares? The edition itself, size of the font and quality and everything is perfectly fine. Well, at this point I can't really tell you subscribe to the channel right away and click the like button while you're at it, but maybe you would like to do it on your own accord. I would be quite happy about that. We will see each other again next week. For today I take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.